Imagine being called a hero by one country, yet a traitor to another. To the Americans, he was nothing but a mad dog, but to Filipinos, he was a symbol of hope and resistance. This is the untold story of Captain David Fagen, the Buffalo Soldier who defied America to fight alongside Filipino revolutionaries. Unknown to many, the Philippine-American War was a bloody conflict that cemented America's rise as an empire. And like many black soldiers in the US Army, David Fagen was sent to fight in the Philippines. But what he saw in these islands, what he saw in our people, changed everything. Faced with the brutal realities of war, David Fagen had to make a choice. Follow orders or follow his conscience. But what exactly made him abandon one of the world's most powerful armies to join a small group of Filipino guerrillas scattered in the jungles? And how exactly did he become a legendary figure of mythological proportions? Mabuhay or in Kapampangan, luwid kayo! Welcome to my channel, it's me Kirby Araullo, your friendly Pinoy historian. Today's video is all about the journey of Captain David Fagen, from his roots in Florida to becoming the beloved General Fagen, immortalized in Philippine history and indigenous mythologies. And this is actually, an expanded version of the video I made 8 years ago. Wow, 8 years na pala. Anyways, this is also based on my years of research from my book, Black Lives and Brown Freedom, published back in 2018, which itself was inspired by the stories I grew up hearing back in the motherland. And actually, that's Captain David Fagen in the cover. Now, to truly understand Captain David Fagen's remarkable journey, we need to go back and look at the world he grew up in. And how did a war halfway across the globe intertwine to his own fight for justice? David Fagen was born in 1875 in Tampa, Florida. It was a time when the United States was still struggling with the aftermath of slavery. The years after the Civil War brought some hope for black people, but that hope didn't last long. Instead, they faced harsh realities like systemic oppression, segregation, discrimination, and violence. Realities that made it clear that for black people, genuine freedom and equality was still out of reach. And during this time, opportunities for African Americans were scarce, even in the military. And by 1898, David Fagen enlisted in the 24th Infantry Regiment, one of only 4 all-black units in the US Army, and they were better known as the Buffalo Soldiers. These Buffalo Soldiers had a long history of bravery, fighting in the Indian Wars and the Spanish-American War. But despite their dedication, they were still treated unfairly. Racism followed them everywhere, even within their own ranks. In fact, many white soldiers and officers refused to see them as equals, and their achievements in these wars were often ignored or downplayed. So during the Philippine-American War in 1899, David Fagen's regiment was sent to the Philippines, right into the middle of a war that was far more complicated than they had expected. The Filipino people had just won their independence from Spain after many years of struggle, only to be betrayed by their allies, the very Americans who had once promised to help Filipinos secure their freedom. What was supposed to be a mission of liberation turned into something far darker, a bloody, horrifying campaign filled with massacres, torture, and widespread destruction. Unknown to many, including Filipinos, entire towns and villages were wiped out, communities were obliterated, hundreds of thousands of civilians were left to starve, and chilling orders were given, like the infamous command to turn Samar, the third largest island in the Philippines, into a howling wilderness by killing everyone over the age of 10. It was a level of brutality and bloodshed that, on one hand, is hard to imagine, yet disturbingly familiar even today. Amid all of this chaos, black soldiers like David Fagen faced a tough moral choice. They were fighting for a country that treated them unfairly, a country that valued them as less than human, while at the same time seeing the same kind of cruelty done to Filipinos. How could they even make sense of this? And what decisions would David Fagen make in the front lines? David Fagen and his regiment were stationed near the Rio Grande de la Pampanga, also known as the Pampanga River, or for us Kapampangans, the Indung Kapampangan River. But this was not just another battlefield. It was a land with a deep history of resistance, where Kapampangan generals like Jose Alejandrino and Maximino Hizon led the fierce fight against American forces. These lands were also home to the Kapampangans and the Aita communities, whose deep connection to the land had shaped their identities, culture, and history for thousands of years. Coming from America and serving in the US Army, David Fagen had already experienced racism and discrimination firsthand. But in the Philippines, he saw something that hit even deeper. Entire villages burned to the ground, families torn apart, and innocent civilians slaughtered without mercy. And all of these were done in the name of bringing freedom and civilization to the Philippines. Ironically, the same ideals America claimed to champion, liberty and justice, were now being used to justify the brutal oppression of a people fighting for their own independence. These brutal realities forced Fagen to face a painful truth. How could he fight for an army that treated him as less than human while also unleashing the same kind of violence and bloodshed against another oppressed people? Filipino revolutionaries saw the parallels between their struggle and the oppression faced by Black people in America. Unknown to many, Filipinos actively reached out to Black soldiers, handing out flyers, speaking to them directly, and personally appealing to their shared struggle and fight against injustice. The Filipinos did not just ask for support, they extended a hand in solidarity in a fight that transcended borders, race, and language, in a quest for liberation that spanned oceans and continents. And their message was clear: this is not your war. Join us instead. And so on November 17, 1899, after months of witnessing the horrors of war and feeling the weight of his conscience, David Fagen made his choice. He took a bold step to defect and join the Filipino army. He sought refuge in Mount Arayat, or Bundukalaya in Kapampangan, a place that had long stood as a sanctuary for those who resisted oppression. For generations, Mount Arayat had been a refuge for the Kapampangans and the Aitas, a symbol of strength in the face of conquest. Now it became the backdrop for David Fagen's own act of defiance. To the Filipinos fighting to defend our motherland's independence, David Fagen's defection was more than just a military decision. It was a powerful stand against tyranny. In turning his back on the US Army, David Fagen did not just switch sides. He embraced a greater fight, a shared struggle for freedom that knew no borders, no race, but only the pursuit of justice. Despite being branded as a bandit, as an evil traitor, and as a mad dog by the Americans, David Fagen became a symbol of hope and resistance for those fighting for liberation in the Philippines. In fact, David Fagen's leadership and bravery in the battlefield quickly earned him recognition and the love of the community. And by the year 1900, he was officially promoted to the rank of captain by General Alejandrino. But David Fagen's impact extended far beyond the battlefield. He immersed himself in the local culture, learning to speak languages like Tagalog and Kapampangan, which allowed him to build deeper connections with the people, with our people. In fact, during his time in Pampanga, David Fagen also fell in love and married a local Filipina, further cementing his bond with our motherland and our people. To both Filipino revolutionaries and local communities, David Fagen's courage and his unwavering commitment earned him their deepest respect. And although he never officially held the rank of general, the Filipino people honored him and fondly called him General Fagen, a tribute to the beloved leader they saw in David. With his knowledge of US military tactics, David Fagen led numerous daring guerrilla raids, consistently outmaneuvering the American forces and frustrating their efforts to crush the Filipino resistance. In fact, his victories did not go unnoticed. Unknown to many today, Fagen's exploits were so remarkable that they made headlines across the United States, including favorable reports from the New York Times, and his ability to outthink and outmaneuver the US military became a testament to his talents, leadership, and defiance. And because of this, David Fagen's defiance struck a deep chord with the people of Central Luzon. From the Aita villages in the mountains to the Kapampangan towns in the lowlands, David Fagen became associated with the Pugut. He was seen as an embodiment of a pre-colonial mythological figure, a dark-skinned giant who was revered as the protector of the forest and the guardian of the land, the indigenous people, and Mother Nature. In fact, in the vocabulario de la lengua Pampanga, the term Pugut was also used to describe the people of Black descent, further linking David Fagen to this powerful indigenous mythology. Indeed, David Fagen's resistance, his strength, and near-mythical abilities to evade capture mirrored the qualities of this ancient guardian. To many, David Fagen was not just a soldier or a warrior. He was a protector, a symbol of liberation, the living embodiment of the feared but revered Pugut. And this fusion of history and mythology reflected the profound impact he had on our people, not just as a soldier, but as a figure whose defiance and bond with the people became legend. And so David Fagen's bold decision to leave the US Army and fight for Filipino freedom made him a hero among revolutionaries and a ghost to his enemies. Throughout the war, David Fagen's name echoed through the jungles of Luzon, whispered in stories of rebellion, resilience, and liberation. As David Fagen's legend grew, so did the US military's determination to bring him down. With a massive bounty on his head, David Fagen's very existence became a mystery. David Fagen had already defied history, so whether he escaped or was finally caught, his legend was unstoppable. Growing up in the Philippines, in Pampanga, I often heard stories about our revolutionary heroes, our bayanis, along with the stories of our mythologies like the Pugut. And so when I learned that the story of David Fagen intertwined with our mythologies, it showed me just how deeply his actions resonated with our people, with the struggles of our people back in the motherland. I mean, just think about it. He was seen as this physical embodiment, this reincarnation of the mythological Pugut, this protector of Mother Nature and liberator of the people. Now, despite being relentlessly hunted down with a hefty bounty on his head, David Fagen evaded capture. So how do you think this story ends? Sadly, by 1901, the First Philippine Republic had officially collapsed. The earliest constitutional democratic republic in Asia was now lost to history. The revolutionaries, once filled with hope for liberation, now faced a devastating reality: surrender or be hunted down. But for David Fagen, surrendering was never an option. With his beloved wife and a small group of loyal followers, David Fagen fled into the mountains of Nueva Ecija, vowing to remain free. Still, the Americans were determined to capture him. General Frederick Funston, the same man who orchestrated the capture of then Filipino President Emilio Aguinaldo, considered Fagen a mad dog that needed to be put down no matter the cost. Indeed, a $600 bounty was placed on his head, and during this time this was a huge amount of money, especially in a war-torn country like the Philippines. And thus, US forces scoured the jungles of central Luzon. Day and night soldiers combed through the mountains and the forest of the region. But time and time again, David Fagen slipped through their grasp, cleverly outmaneuvering and outsmarting some of the most experienced guerrilla hunters of the time. Meanwhile, as the war neared its end, General Jose Alejandrino, Fagen's close friend and commander, faced his own difficult decision. General Alejandrino had no choice but to surrender in 1901, but not before using every bit of influence and every bit of leverage he had to try and secure amnesty for David Fagen and the other black soldiers who had joined the Filipinos. The Americans, however, stubbornly refused. To them, David Fagen was not just a deserter, he was a powerful symbol of defiance, and thus they wanted him eliminated by whatever means possible. Now in May of 1901, another Filipino officer, General Urbano Lacuna, also attempted to negotiate David Fagen's surrender. But General Funston, driven by a personal vendetta, made it clear that if David Fagen was caught, there would be no trial, no clemency, only execution. In the eyes of General Funston, David Fagen was nothing but a bandit, pure and simple, a mad dog that must be put down. Now, unknown to many, before parting ways, General Alejandrino made sure that David Fagen was well equipped for survival, giving him money, weapons, and supplies to continue his resistance. Their bond was more than just that of a commander and his officer. It was a brotherhood forged in battle, strengthened by their shared ideals of liberation. Decades later, in his memoirs, La Senda del Sacrificio, or The Price of Freedom, published in the 1930s, General Alejandrino wrote that David Fagen was more than just a highly skilled soldier. He was an affectionate and loyal companion. He recalled moments when David Fagen, seeing the general sick and exhausted, carried him across rivers and through the mountains, refusing to leave his side. General Alejandrino likened David Fagen's devotion to that of a son or a brother, a testament to their deep and the unbreakable bond they had built. By 1901, a Filipino bounty hunter delivered a severed head to US forces, claiming that it was David Fagen's. But the Americans were never able to confirm the identity, and the details surrounding David Fagen's supposed death remained murky. There was no body, no real proof, only speculation. Nevertheless, the Americans declared that David Fagen was dead. Yet, despite this, reports of David Fagen's whereabouts continued to surface. In fact, sightings placed him everywhere, from cities under American control to the dense jungles where Filipino revolutionaries still resisted. And because of this, General Funston, obsessed with capturing him, followed every lead, even surrounding Manila at one point, in a desperate attempt to trap David Fagen, only to fail once again. Indeed, rumors of David Fagen's survival would spread like wildfire. Some said he had escaped and was living peacefully with his wife, hidden among the indigenous Aitas of Central Luzon, while others believed that he remained hidden, always one step ahead, still evading capture, and thus fading into legend. These whispered tales only deepened his mythology, blurring the line between history and legend. But David Fagen's story did not end with his disappearance. His legacy and his name lived on in Kapampangan and Aita oral traditions, where he was remembered not just as a soldier, but as a protector of the people, someone who stood up against oppression, embodying the spirit of defiance and resistance. Indeed, his legacy of courage and compassion intertwined with the mythology of the Pugut, a dark-skinned guardian linked to protection, justice, and harmony with nature. And although the legend of the Pugut had existed long before Fagen, his defiance, bravery, and deep connection to the land and our people made him its living embodiment. So, was he a traitor, as the Americans claimed? Or was he a hero, as the Filipinos remembered him? Well, the truth is, history left us with no doubt. David Fagen made a choice, and that choice was to stand with the oppressed, to fight for liberation, no matter the cost. But what exactly happened to David Fagen after the war? Was he captured, killed, or did he escape to live a quiet life? We may never know for sure, but his disappearance and the legend surrounding him ensured that his name would endure in history and mythology. Growing up surrounded by the very same rivers and mountains where all of this happened, hearing about David Fagen's legacy and story felt like he wasn't just a figure from history, but as someone whose story still echoes in the land he once defended, in the struggles of those who continue to fight for freedom today. Because to be honest, David Fagen's story is not just about defiance, it is about unity. It proves that the fight for justice transcends borders, nationality, and race. I mean, let's be honest, the same injustices he stood up against, racism, colonialism, and oppression, still exist today. And so his legacy is a reminder that solidarity is truly powerful. Just as he stood with Filipinos in our struggle for independence, it is our responsibility to stand with others fighting for their rights, whether in our own communities or across the world. History is not just meant to be remembered, it is a call to action. It is about doing better, and what we do next is what truly defines us. The life of David Fagen challenges us not just to remember but to honor, and most importantly to act. Captain David Fagen may very well be the most well-known black soldier to defect during the Philippine-American War, but unknown to many, he was not alone. Indeed, many African Americans also questioned their role in the war. Many defected to fight alongside Filipinos, while many others resisted quietly by refusing orders, sharing supplies, or passing information to the Filipino revolutionaries. And beyond the battlefield, figures like I.W. Wells and W.E.B. Du Bois condemned U.S. imperialism, exposing the shared struggles of Filipinos and black people, while at the same time, educators like Carter G. Woodson, who was also sent to serve in the Philippines, worked hard to build connections and liberation through education. And together, these acts of defiance and solidarity tell us of a larger story, of the often overlooked history of solidarity and the deeper bonds between Black and Filipinos. A reminder that the fight for justice took many forms, from the front lines to the headlines, from the battlefields to the classrooms. Because if you think about it, resistance is not always about being the loudest. It can also be found in the quiet acts of courage, genuine acts of courage and solidarity that go beyond our lifetime, reminding us that the fight for justice is never just history. It flows through our veins, a part of our heritage, a legacy that we must carry forward. Okay, now fun fact. I was actually born exactly 89 years after David Fagen joined the Filipino revolutionaries in Mount Arayat. And so for me, sharing these stories is not just about sharing history. It is about ensuring that these struggles and these voices are never forgotten. So if you want to dive deeper, make sure to check out my other videos on Black and Brown histories, or grab a copy of my book, Black Lives and Brown Freedom. This book dives deep into the forgotten history of solidarity between Filipinos and African Americans, honoring the shared struggles, resilience, and the intertwined histories of our communities. Maraming salamat po o in Kapampangan dakal pong salamat kay Kongan, and in Binisaya daghang salamat sa inyong tanan. See you next time or in Tagalog kita kits and in Kapampangan, Mikitix and in Binisaya kita aita.